the result of an OPEC breakup will mean that oil transactions will not be settled in the US dollar internationally any longer. Sure, some countries that are still in OPEC that depend on the US military to defend them may continue to take the US dollar only for the sale of their oil. I think it's one of the reasons you've seen US production ramp up, because that way they could keep the petrodollar from being completely knocked out and being shocked by a breakup of OPEC.
Now, speaking of the value of the US dollar, another important factor that has played a huge role in decreasing the dollar's value over the years is the Federal Reserve expanding the money supply. Now, over the last year or so, the Federal Reserve has been doing this quantitative easing QE program, which is basically just a huge money printing program. They were once, printing $85 billion a month. Now they've tapered it down to about $15 billion per month. And this month, they're saying that they might end quantitative easing altogether for now. What is your perspective on how this might impact the value of the dollar?
Well, I'm somebody who believes they haven't even stopped the QE. They've just done other gimmicks of stimulating the economy, so they believe this stimulates the economy. But I think that we're in a countdown to QE4. And I talked about this last week, where really it's kind of like it's proof of the end game for the current economic business cycle that we're in, and for that matter, potentially the US dollar. And what I mean by that is that when you've reached a point economically where the only way that you could continue to have growth, or what they call growth, I would just call it inflation, is by unleashing massive amounts of printed money or money created on the computer, that's a sign that the economy is doomed, in my opinion. And we've seen that's clearly been what the Fed's been doing since 2008. You could make the argument even before that with the housing bubble that they created. And so the point is that even with record low interest rates, even with the Fed buying garbage mortgage-backed securities and treasuries that nobody else wants, we see that it hasn't really created any real economic growth. Now, when there's talk of potentially tapering, or that we're going to end it, or that we're going to allow interest rates to begin to rise, we see the stock market begin to absolutely collapse. We see consumer confidence collapse. And so they're not going to let that happen, I believe. I think they're going to ride this to the very end. And the very end will be a blow up of the US dollar. It doesn't mean that we won't continue to use the US dollar, but I think it's going to have a tremendous impact on the value of the dollar long term.
Now, on your video blog, you've discussed that there will probably be more QE soon, but eventually they're going to have to do a massive QE program, possibly like $10 trillion a year or something like that. Did you want to discuss a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that for sure there is a mega QE plan in the works that will likely stem around some kind of disaster. I actually thought it was going to happen much sooner with, this so-called war against ISIS that's really been created, or a war with ISIS, or for that matter, a bio weapon, or this Ebola thing spreading, where basically central banks, Western central banks, collude together to say, hey, we need to do something. We got to print more money. We're in this new crisis. And I think that is something to really begin to look out for. The potential of what's often deemed a false flag, or staged attack, or staged event, to be a catalyst for more QE, or for that matter, to have the general public beg government to do something. That's exactly what happened in 2008 with the bank failures. People were all freaked out. And so no one questioned, hey, let's just print up $1 trillion and give it to the big banks. So during a crisis is when we'll see the big mega QE, that it could be a potential, or I believe will be sold as this, almost last ditch effort, QE of all QE, kind of like they said World War I was the war to end all wars. And I think that's what ultimately we see before the world catches on that, look, the U.S. is destroying its own currency, and by default exporting massive inflation around the world.
Now, with this most recent quantitative easing program, QE3, it seems like it hasn't had a huge effect on the precious metal markets. It seems actually that the precious metal markets have gone down. we've talked about this before, and you've said that it seems like possibly this could be because of manipulation. Do you see when this mega QE program hits that the inflation that comes from it could overwhelm the manipulation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely going to come the day when you're going to see an incredible break of $2,000 to $3,000 increases in the price of gold, and hundreds of dollars potentially in the price of silver. When that happens, I don't know. I do know a good indicator is, well, like anything, when you see, follow the money. And in this case, we have the uber elites talking about how gold is a barbaric relic, but then behind the scenes, as was quoted, I believe, in Business Insider, they're buying gold Italian job style, literally buy these bars of gold that are worth about 600 pounds. And so they are stockpiling gold. China is stockpiling gold. And even the Russians are buying gold hand over fist. A lot of other central banks are buying gold, as are, like I said, the uber elite. And all of the, it's kind of like you got to ask yourself, well, what do those people and what do those sovereigns know that the average American doesn't know? When, I'll tell you what, it's that the dollar and the dollar payment system and the world reserve currency as it exists is, it's reaching the end of its life.
Before we let you go, I wanted to touch on one last subject. You discussed in a video recently that when the big hedge funds start selling real estate properties, that will probably be the biggest indicator for the next big leg down in the economy. Did you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, well, I think that in the circles we run in, Elijah, there's a lot of, if I was talking about economic collapse is going to happen, next Thursday at 5 p.m., that's going to likely be popular, but it's not going to be authentic. The truth is that this Federal Reserve banking system is going to continue to drive cheap money, 0% interest rates, unless, of course, there's some kind of black swan event, which will result in asset prices continuing to increase, i.e. the stock market, which I believe will hit $20,000 over 20,000 on the Dow over the next couple of years. Real estate prices will continue to see double-digit growth year after year as well. And I believe, I know this firsthand, that for a lot of these uber elites, the real estate market's the biggest indicator of the overall economy. So when I begin to see no money down loans come out like crazy, which we're already seeing them, and when I begin to see these big hedge funds selling their millions of properties and dumping them into the market, I think that we have a big problem on our hands because they are quietly exiting these manipulated markets in order to save themselves. And they know that, the end is, or a big leg down is upon us. So that to me is the biggest indicator, is what are the big hedge funds, which are now the largest landlord in America, when and for what reasons will they begin dumping these homes? And so that's what I'm looking for. And that has not started yet. In fact, a lot of hedge fund managers are calling this right now the consolidation phase, where the biggest owners of distressed real estate are actually getting much bigger by buying out a lot of the other smaller companies. And you got to understand that a lot of these big hedge funds are almost all the time in open door meetings with the Federal Reserve. They are, if not owners of the Federal Reserve, some of the bigger ones being JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. They're offshoots of some of these big banking cartels as well. So again, that's to me the biggest sign to look for.
Well, Fabian Calvo, thank you so much for your insights today. If our viewers would like to learn more, where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. They can go to fabian4liberty.com. That's Fabian, the number 4.com. I also have a daily podcast that they can listen to, and that link is on there as well, where I talk a lot about some of the things we've talked about. I think I would just leave the audience, Elijah, with this is the time right now to be preparing for these types of events. And by that, I don't mean the obvious, which is usually, what preppers, i.e. preppers, will talk about, which is water, food, all that stuff. But I mean, I personally look at this as a complete fundamental transformation of the current world that we live in. And not all of it is going to be bad. Some of this is going to be creative destruction, what's often referred to in Austrian economics as creative destruction, and that's actually going to be a good thing. I think people need to be prepared. They need to know that the world is moving toward automation. that a lot of jobs that are around now will not be around in a couple of years. So they need to prepare financially, I think, by investing in themselves and investing in maybe a new business venture or investing in a lifestyle that is not dependent on government or on some of these industries that are being revolutionized as we speak.
Fabian, thank you once again for your time.
Thanks, Elijah. Nice talking with you.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Click here to subscribe for free to FinanceAndLiberty.com and also our sponsor, ReluctantPreppers.com, helping you be aware and prepared.